Everyone keeps telling you the same thing. AI is going to save the economy, it's going to fix productivity, fix growth, fix the labor shortage, fix basically everything that's been quietly breaking for the last 20 years. There's just one problem. The economy isn't actually being fixed. It's just getting a very expensive new coat of paint. Today we're going to walk through why artificial intelligence, as transformative as it genuinely is not going to save the economy, and why almost everyone talking about this on television has a reason to want you to believe otherwise. Let's start with the hype itself, because it's worth understanding how we got here. Every few decades, a technology comes along that gets called the thing that changes everything. Railroads did it, electricity did it, the internet did it, and each time the promise sounds identical. This technology will unlock a new era of growth, productivity, and prosperity for everyone. And each time something strange happens on the way to that promised future. The technology absolutely does change the world, but the economic benefits almost never land where or how anyone expected. AI is currently following that exact script, almost beat for beat. Right now, trillions of dollars are being poured into AI infrastructure, data centers, chips, power plants being built specifically to feed data centers, entire cities being reshaped around server farms. If you looked only at the investment numbers, you'd assume the economy was in the middle of the greatest boom in modern history. But here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. Massive investment in a technology is not the same thing as that technology actually producing widespread economic value. Those are two completely different stages, and right now we are deep in stage one, the spending stage, while everyone talks about it as if we're already living in stage two, the payoff stage. This distinction matters more than almost anything else in this conversation, so let's slow down on it. When a company spends $1 billion building a data center, that spending shows up immediately in GDP, construction jobs, chip purchases, electricity contracts. It all counts as economic activity right now, today. But whether that data center ever generates $1 billion of actual value back into the economy is a completely separate question, one that can take years to answer, if it gets answered at all. We've seen this movie before. In the late 1990s, telecom companies spent hundreds of billions of dollars laying fiber optic cable across the world, convinced that internet demand would justify the investment. The bet wasn't wrong, exactly. The internet did become massive. But the timeline was brutally wrong. Roughly 90% of that fiber sat completely unused for years, sometimes over a decade, while the companies that built it went bankrupt waiting for demand to catch up to their spending. The technology succeeded. Many of the companies betting on it did not. And the workers, investors, and communities caught in the middle of that gap paid the price for years afterward. That's the pattern worth watching now. Not whether AI is real or powerful, it clearly is. The question is whether the economic payoff arrives on the timeline everyone is currently pricing in, or whether we're staring down another version of the fiber optic story, just with GPS instead of cable. Now let's talk about productivity, because this is where the AI will save the economy argument really starts to wobble. The entire economic case for AI rests on one core idea. It will make workers and companies dramatically more productive, and that productivity will eventually show up in higher wages, cheaper goods, and stronger overall growth. That's the theory. Here's the problem. We've had powerful, transformative technology before, and productivity gains from it have consistently shown up later, smaller, and far more unevenly distributed than the initial hype ever suggested. Economists actually have a name for this. It's called the productivity paradox, and it's shown up with almost every major technological wave. Computers entered offices in the 1970s and 80s, and it took roughly 2 full decades before that investment showed up clearly in national productivity statistics. Why the delay? Because technology alone doesn't create productivity. Technology plus the total reorganization of how businesses actually operate creates productivity, and that reorganization is slow, expensive, and full of friction because it involves real humans, real institutions, and real resistance to change. AI is going to follow the same curve. Companies aren't just plugging in a chatbot and instantly becoming twice as efficient. They're spending years figuring out how to restructure workflows, retrain employees, rebuild internal processes, and, let's be honest, figuring out how many of those employees they can eliminate entirely. That process is happening right now, but it's happening slowly, unevenly, and mostly behind closed doors. Which brings us to the part of this conversation that gets glossed over the most. What happens to the labor market while all of this unfolds? Here's an uncomfortable truth. In the short and medium term, the most measurable, provable economic effect of AI so far isn't some dramatic productivity miracle. It's job displacement in very specific categories: customer service, entry level coding, content writing, basic data analysis, first round hiring screens. These aren't hypothetical job losses being debated in an economics journal. Companies are actively citing AI as a reason for layoffs and hiring freezes, particularly for entry level roles that used to be how young workers got their first foothold in a career. Now, technological disruption creating short term job losses isn't new. Every major technology shift in history has destroyed some jobs while eventually creating others. The optimistic argument is always, don't worry, new jobs will replace the old ones, just like they always have. And historically, that's often been true, eventually. But eventually is doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence. The transition period between old jobs disappearing and new jobs appearing at scale has, historically, been long, painful, and unevenly distributed. It's measured in years, sometimes decades, not months, and the people who lose their jobs during that transition are rarely the same people who end up filling the new roles that eventually emerge. A 50-year-old customer service worker whose job gets automated away isn't smoothly transitioning into a role designing AI systems. That's not how any of this actually works on the ground, no matter how clean it sounds in a keynote presentation. So even if AI genuinely does create new categories of jobs down the line, and it probably will, there's a very real, very human gap in between. An economy doesn't get saved by a promise of future jobs while millions of people are struggling through the actual transition happening right now. Let's talk about where the money is actually going, because this might be the most important part of the entire conversation. The financial gains from the AI boom so far have been extraordinarily concentrated. A small handful of companies, the ones building the chips, the cloud infrastructure, and the largest AI models, have captured an enormous share of the stock market's gains over the past several years. If you strip those companies out of major market indexes, the picture of the economy looks meaningfully less impressive. This matters because when people say AI is saving the economy, what they often actually mean is AI is making a small number of already massive companies significantly more valuable. Those are not remotely the same claim, even though they get talked about as if they are. Rising stock prices for a handful of trillion-dollar companies do not automatically translate into higher wages for the average worker, lower costs for the average family, or a stronger foundation for the broader economy. Wealth concentrated at the very top of a handful of balance sheets doesn't circulate the way broad-based wage growth does. And here's the uncomfortable follow-up question nobody really wants to sit with. Even if AI does eventually generate enormous economic value, who actually captures that value? Historically, the benefits of transformative technology have tended to flow disproportionately toward capital, toward the owners of the technology and the companies deploying it, rather than toward labor, especially in the early years. If that pattern holds here too, then AI saves the economy quietly becomes AI saves the balance sheets of the companies that already own it, which is a very different sentence than the one usually being sold to the public. Now let's zoom out even further, because there's a structural problem here that AI, no matter how powerful it becomes, simply cannot fix on its own. The economy isn't struggling because of a single missing ingredient that technology can magically supply. It's dealing with a stack of deep structural issues that have been building for years: aging populations in major economies, enormous levels of government and corporate debt, slowing population growth, and widening inequality that's been compounding for decades. These aren't productivity problems. You cannot code your way out of demographics. You cannot prompt engineer your way out of a debt load that took 40 years to build. AI can make certain tasks faster and cheaper, and that's genuinely valuable. But faster and cheaper task completion doesn't repair a national balance sheet, doesn't reverse a shrinking workforce, and doesn't undo decades of underinvestment in the parts of the economy that don't generate flashy headlines. There's also a physical, real world constraint that rarely makes it into the optimistic version of this story: energy. Training and running large AI systems requires an enormous and rapidly growing amount of electricity. In some regions, data center demand is now straining power grids that were never designed to support this kind of load, driving up energy costs and, in some cases, delaying the retirement of older, dirtier power plants, specifically to keep up with AI demand. So even the infrastructure buildout that's supposed to fuel this new era of growth is running directly into old-fashioned physical limits, limits that don't care how impressive the underlying technology is. None of this means AI isn't real, isn't powerful, or isn't going to change enormous parts of how the world works. It absolutely will. But there's a wide, important gap between this technology is genuinely transformative and this technology is going to save an economy that's been structurally strained for decades. Those are two very different claims, and right now, an enormous amount of financial and political incentive is riding on people not noticing the difference. Companies benefit from investors believing AI justifies today's valuations. Governments benefit from citizens believing a technological miracle is coming to solve problems that are politically painful and expensive to fix directly. Media outlets benefit from an exciting, optimistic story that keeps people watching. Almost everyone with a microphone in this conversation has some reason to want you to believe the saving the economy version of this story, rather than the slower, messier, more uneven reality actually unfolding underneath it. So, where does that leave things? AI is probably going to reshape huge parts of the economy over the coming decade. Some of that reshaping will be genuinely good: new tools, new efficiencies, new kinds of work that don't exist yet. But reshaping and saving are not the same word, and they're definitely not the same outcome for the people living through it. A handful of companies getting dramatically richer while millions of workers navigate a rocky, uneven transition isn't an economy being saved. It's an economy being rearranged. And rearrangements always have winners and losers, no matter how the headlines choose to frame it. The real question isn't whether AI is powerful enough to matter. Clearly, it is. The real question is who actually benefits while everyone else is being told to simply wait for the trickle-down effect to eventually arrive. And how long eventually is actually going to take this time.